I'm Marky Billson, Tri-City Sports Now, and I'm here with a sports writing legend, Vito Stellino. He votes on the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And if I may sort of paraphrase Mickey from Rocky, he's seen it all. From the Alex Karras Lions, we were just talking about, he covered his suspension from the NFL to modern day. You can read him, VitoStolino.com, covering the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, I was going through this. You did Karras with the Lions, Namath and Tarkenton with the Giants, for crying out loud, the great Steelers teams, the end of the Baltimore Colts and their move, including and their winless season, right at the end, the Washington Redskins of the Hogs and Joe Gibbs, and then the birth of the Jacksonville Jaguars, their great run in the late 90s when they were trading punches with the Steelers and the Titans. And then now, you know, you've covered the Jacksonville Jaguars since then, up until their rebirth, through their rebirth this past season. Excuse me, I'll spit it out. Vito Stellino, that's a career. I mean, that's incredible what I know. And you've done national stuff, and you vote on the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So let me ask you this: on the day that Jason Witten retires, is he a Hall of Famer?
Oh, I think so. His numbers will, certainly kind of speak for themselves. Unfortunately, he didn't play in a great Cowboy era. That I don't think he was in a Super Bowl, but still play at Dallas is a pretty high-profile team. And I would think he's got definitely a very good chance of making it.
Well, he's fourth all-time in catches. That's big. His yards per catch average isn't all that great at 10.8 yards a carry, or at a catch, excuse me, Vito. But would you say that fourth all-time in catches, is that therefore worthy of a first ballot Hall of Famer in your mind right now, not committing you to your vote when you're in that room in 5 years, but does your gut tell you that Witten is a first ballot Hall of Famer?
Yeah, the Hall of Fame does not make a big deal about the first ballot. That's kind of like a fan thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whether or not he makes the first ballot, really hard to say. Kind of depends on, who else is, who else is up when he's up, and in his first year, that type of thing. But I mean, if you make it your fifth year, you're still a Hall of Famer. So it's just a little frosting on the cake for players. But and actually, I think it's almost becoming a problem because. Last year we named 3 of the 5 guys were first-year guys, and that's pushing back some other guys who have been waiting, and especially offensive linemen, and they keep waiting. So, but I think, so whether he makes it or not, that would depend on who else comes up that year, who's in the ballot, all those kind of things. I mean, he's certainly not, he's not like an automatic type of guy that you just say, he's a Hall of Famer. He's not. He won't be the Ray Lewis of his class. That type of thing.
Can I ask you? We've talked about how the voting works, and it's different from baseball. But you're all in a room, Super Bowl weekend, and there are writers who are asked to make the presentation. Usually, it's someone who has covered that team and contemporarily covers the team. But where I'm going with this is I'm curious. I mean, here you've covered the Jaguars for a long time, but you also, like I said, covered those great Steeler teams. And so if there was, say, an old time, just like Jerry Kramer did this past year, and let's say L.C. Greenwood, people have talked about L.C. Greenwood as a Hall of Famer. Would this be something, since you covered him, that you would make the presentation for, or would Ed Bouchette of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, who didn't cover L.C. Greenwood but has covered the Steelers for 30-odd years, would he be making the presentation for a Greenwood in that situation?
Yeah, he would make the presentation because he's the current Pittsburgh guy, So that would be that would be his bailiwick.
That's interesting to me.
But I should say, actually, he's now a senior candidate, so somebody on the senior committee would
Okay. I was looking at that and I guess the same thing would have occurred last year when you covered Joe Jacoby, but you did not make his presentation in that room.
Yeah, I forget who actually made it, but yeah, no, it wasn't. I didn't make the presentation, and neither did the Washington guy. It was, I don't think anyway. I'm pretty sure it was one of the. Oh, wait a second. It was the Washington guy because he wasn't a senior candidate. He was up.
It was his last year. Yeah.
He's a senior candidate now, but he wasn't a senior candidate last year.
I'm surprised on that because I'm not sure I actually agree with that because I mean I would have thought if there's somebody there that has been around and seen them, maybe you're a little more qualified to argue with Joe Jacoby than the contemporary beat writer who may not have seen him or been around him in the 80s. I'm kind of surprised about that, but it would now who is the Dallas presenter for the Hall of Fame? Because that would be making the assuming he's there in 5 years, but that would be who would be making the argument for Jason Witten. Who's the Dallas voter? Do you know? Okay, so there's somebody that I need to go track down as well here. Vito Stellino, VitoStellino.com, legendary football writer. I mentioned all the greats that he has covered and written about, and really writing that I learned in the sporting news, talking about franchise relocation, the stadium game. That's his right here that we were talking to, and certainly a Hall of Fame voter. You've seen them all. You've covered games where Mike Ditka didn't coach. No, he played. You've done the same with John Mackey. So I want to ask this. First of all, why did it take so long for tight ends to be considered as Hall of Famers? Ditka was the first, but was it just because before Ditka the position was thought to be a third tackle? Was that it, or is there another reason?
And it's kind of a newer position. I forget exactly when it became, when it became in vogue, but and also it's now tight ends who are good blockers. They tend to get short shrift compared to tight ends who catch a lot of passes. Whether that's fair or not, it's just it's the life of the tight end. So unless they were prolific in receiving, they have a difficult time getting in. Jackie Smith took a long time to get in, and there was a debate about whether his drop in the Super Bowl hurt him. I actually think maybe in the long run it helped because it gave him more. People talked about it, so it gave him visibility, and they looked at his career. He was a St. Louis all those years, but he's kind of remembered unfairly, but for that one drop in the Super Bowl. But yeah, for whatever reason, there aren't a lot of tight ends in the Hall of Fame.
That drop in the Super Bowl 13 was actually a reference point and talked about in an old episode of Barney Miller, if you can believe it here. So that was, very big at the time. But yeah, I've always thought he got a bad rap on that because, let's face it, in that game, the final score was 35-31. But the Cowboys' last two touchdowns were kind of by the way touchdowns and such. And one wonders if it's a 35-21 game, if really the Steelers are playing that prevent defense with halfway through the fourth quarter that allows Staubach to get so many yards scrambling and such. It's debatable, but I've always thought that Smith did receive a bad rap for the drop pass. How influential really was. I'll ask you that since I've got you right here. Do you think that the Cowboys could have taken that game into overtime if it wasn't? Because I have thought that those last two touchdowns were kind of by the way scores. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a whole different game if he catches that pass. So, the score was 35-17, midway in the fourth quarter. So as you say, they're playing, they're playing prevent defense, and then they botched an onside kick too.
Yeah.
They had to recover the onside kick, which is a long shot, but they did. They give them credit, and that, I'm betting on my defense. And he got him within, he threw a ball in the end zone on the last play, and it was intercepted, so he did move the ball. But again, the Steeler defense prevailed. There's no, but had the defense scored, he'd have been really second-guessed for not punting and putting him deeper. But Bobby Walden, who was playing his last game, they'd almost blocked a couple already, so he would rather put it on his defense than risk a block,
Bobby Walden, a one-time backfield mate of Fran Tarkenton at Georgia. He was one of his running backs back then in the short passing game and such. But yes, I know what you're speaking of there. And in fact, I've actually had this conversation with Ed Bouchette and the then sports editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette all at the same table. And yeah, Bouchette, who votes in the Hall of Fame, just as you do, Vito Stellino, does not believe really in punters in the Hall of Fame. This sort of thing. He's talked about it and said, look, they didn't need one there, that was one of his points. Anyway, we're talking about Jason Witten, who retired today after 15 years, the Dallas Cowboys' fourth all-time leading receiver in the NFL. And that is going to stay for a while, because if you look at who's behind him, it's going to be a few years before anybody catches Witten with the number 4 spot. I could see Larry Fitzgerald potentially moving up, but I do think that Jerry Rice's all-time reception record is also safe. But let me ask this. Jason Witten, I mentioned this, you've covered all the great tight ends, from seeing Lions-Bears games with Mike Ditka in his first NFL championship season through the Wittens, the Gonzaleses, these people and all this. Where do you rank Jason Witten among all-time tight ends?
Oh, wow, that's tough. I'd have to start thinking about him. He certainly, he wasn't Kellen Winslow, for example. I don't even know if he was Mike Ditka or John Mackey, because they were such good blockers.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not put him in a running for the best, tight end, but he's certainly up there. And he played his career in a passing era, so he got a lot of catches, type of thing.
How much has that influenced him? Because we talked 5-yard bump and run rule. Witten was never going to have the speed of, let's say, a Mackey. He's 40 pounds heavier. How could he? But, he was very adept at, blowing the defenders away. You're not going to knock me off here, and then coming open for, say, a 10-yard gain over the middle and such. So how do you think that Witten, how would he have played in an earlier era, is my question, with the 10-yard bump and run rule?
Well, no, there wasn't 10 yards. You could hit a guy until the ball was thrown. You could hit him all over the field. It wasn't 10 yards.
So that would have been why, and I've often said this, that you look at, say, John Mackey as a tight end, he had 2 years averaging 20 yards a catch. You wouldn't see that from a tight end these days, but you had to run a longer route back then to get past the guy. And so, but I'm going to ask, how do you think Witten could have performed in an era without the 5-yard bump and run rule?
He still would have been good, whether he'd have been this bad. I don't think he would have caught this many passes, but he certainly, would have been a very good player. Good players, find a way to be good in any era. But you have to, when you look at their stats, you have to understand the time they played and what the rules were, and that, and all those types of things.
Well, let me ask this. I mentioned before that I said that Jason Witten is the Cowboys' all-time tight end, but Mike Ditka is the greatest tight end ever play for the Cowboys. Now, you might actually argue Jackie Smith in that argument too, but I just think Ditka really did revolutionize the position. But where would you put Witten among all-time Cowboys? Would he be a top 5 Cowboy in your opinion?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, you're talking about Staubach, Tony Dorsett, Emmitt Smith,
Bob Lilly?
Michael Irvin, I don't think he's in the top. And I'm leaving out, of course, Bob Lilly. Yeah, no, those 5 guys right there.
So I see where you're going. Yeah, Bob Lilly, to me, is probably the greatest cowboy. You could argue Emmitt Smith because he's the all-time leading rusher. But when they did the 75th anniversary team, Lilly was the one true, I played my entire career, the majority of my career with the Cowboys player that was on the team. And I think when they do it again in a year or two, he'll still be an all-time NFL player on the defensive line, Bob Lilly. And really a local product down there. He went to TCU before he played for the Dad and was an original Dallas Cowboy. I always got a kick out of that. Vito Stellino, talking a little bit about Jason Witten and where he ranks. You believe he's a Hall of Famer, first ballot, possibly. I just came up with a belief that Witten is the greatest athlete from the Tri-Cities area. I mean, when you're fourth all-time in NFL catches, how are you going to argue with that? But I want to also, did you have any stories that you did with Jason Witten? Did you ever have any personal interaction with him when you were covering the NFL, both nationally at one point and there in Jacksonville with the Florida Times-Union? Now you're on website, vitostellino.com.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was covering AFC teams, so, they rarely played the Cowboys, and then he wasn't in, Super Bowl, so yeah, no, I didn't have that much, interaction with him, just saw him from a distance.
But you will be voting on him and such, this sort of thing. Anyway, let me just ask you that, though. If I was going all the great potential Hall of Famers, two of them in the Hall and one probably going to make it in all likelihood, Witten, Smith, and Ditka, I'm going to ask you to rank those three. Where do you rank them? Ditka, Smith, and Witten, the three great Cowboy tight ends. Where would you, I mean, not including a Billy Joe Dupree or a Jay Novacek, but where would you rank them in that three?
Probably where you get it, although I would really consider Ditka and Smith Cowboy tight ends. I mean, they just finished their career there. I mean, Ditka's a Bear, Smith's a Cardinal, or St. Louis. So I would think of Cowboy tight ends, the guys who spent their career in Dallas, that he would rank number one, Witten.
Yeah, and that is saying so because Novacek was so good in that era. And I remember, in the off season, he was a cowboy in Nebraska. He had his own ranch and all that. There was a lot mentioned about that as well. Before I leave you, Vito Stellino, I do want to ask, I mean, you're in that room. How come guys like Mark Bavaro or Todd Christensen are not in the Hall of Fame, or for that matter, even a Jay Novacek, who is a 5-time Pro Bowler? How come these guys have not been in the Hall of Fame? Is there a bias against tight ends?
Well, I just always say, who are you going to take out to, the competition is just so difficult, and you only got 5 guys a year. So, anybody who says, well, my guy should be in, I first say, who are you going to take out to make room for him? The Hall of Fame sets the rules, and by limiting it to 5, but they say it's the Hall of Fame. It should be a real honor. So, it's just difficult to make it, which is probably the way it should be.
You've seen them all. Who's the best tight end ever, in your opinion?
Oh wow, the best tight end ever. That's difficult. I'd say a tight end, a big guy with, blocker, receiver, probably John Marky. The receiving types, maybe Kellen Winslow.
What about Tony Gonzalez, who's first all-time in catches among tight ends?
Yeah, he would be in there. I don't know if he had quite the impact that Kellen Winslow did. But, I mean, you could make the argument either way. I mean, you could pick them, flip a coin on them, actually.
I'll say the game everyone remembers Kellen Winslow for, the miracle in Miami, the 41-38 game. And I remember being a little boy and all this. And, now in the Tri-Cities, which is quasi close to Virginia Tech, and seeing Don Strock from Virginia Tech establish himself as possibly the I mean, talk about this position, damning with faint praise, but possibly the greatest all-time backup QB in that game, but it was Winslow blocking the field goal, playing when he was exhausted, all that. Perhaps the most memorable game in NFL history, and certainly if it was not Strock, it was actually Winslow who was the player everyone remembers because he's the guy that won the game. The guy that wins a lot of writing awards and who votes on the Hall of Fame. By the way, I've got one guy coming here and saying, Ozzie Newsome. Hard to argue with that either. Tri-City Sports Now. Vito Stellino is here. I'll talk about what some other guys are saying about Witten in the Hall of Fame, and then we're going to talk about saving the Norks Wilkesboro Speedway. The Facebook will go back to my personal page after this. Tri-City Sports Now. All right.
Open your eyes to
I hope you enjoyed that. I did.
mind smarter ways of doing
Thank you.
You'll find
Yeah, I think he should be in the Hall of Fame as the general manager and the player.
There you go.